Well, every year the Queen's birthday honours list is full of household names, along with quiet achievers who aren't quite so well known. This year, one Australian receiving the highest honour, the Companion of the Order of Australia, is the West Australian Chief Justice, Wayne Martin. The Chief Justice has been on a mission to make the courts more open and more easily understood by those of us without a law degree. Wayne Martin AC joined me from Perth a short time ago. Chief Justice Martin, firstly, congratulations on your AC.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to start by asking you, do you think that most Australians have a good grasp on what judges actually do?
Well, I think there are some misconceptions out there in terms of what we do and why, and that's why I've been keen to try and improve public understanding of what judges and courts do.
What do you think are the misconceptions?
Well, I think they misconceive some of the procedures that we adopt and don't understand the reasons why we adopt those procedures. I think they misconceive some of the outcomes. There are misconceptions with respect to levels of punishment that don't actually match the facts.
Can you understand, though, why sometimes the public might feel that there's a sentence that seems particularly lenient when a crime seems particularly heinous?
I can well understand that, and there's room, of course, for differing views in relation to the outcome of a sentence. But, of course, judges and courts have to apply the law that's laid down by the legislature, and we have to take a range of considerations into account, which include punishment, of course, but also include the best means of protecting society, which is by changing the offending behaviour.
You've introduced a number of changes to the courts in Western Australia, allowing cameras, ditching wigs and robes, for example. Why are you doing those things?
I think it's important for the courts to be seen as contemporary and relevant Australian institutions. I think one of the complaints that one hears commonly is that courts are out of touch with contemporary Australians. I think things like the robes are a symbol of not being completely in touch and contemporary, and I think that's an important symbol of change. But also using the media to improve access to the courts is a very important way, I think, of showing how courts are relevant to contemporary Australians.
Let me ask you a bit about some of the legal issues that we hear often come up in Australia. Firstly, drugs. Earlier this month, the former Director of Public Prosecutions in New South Wales, Nicholas Cowdery, said that the state should legalise illicit drugs and end prosecutions of individuals for self-administered drug use. Where do you stand on that?
The question of whether or not drug abuse is lawful or unlawful is a matter for the legislature, not for the courts, and so I'm happy to leave that to the legislature.
Do you think that judges should generally stay away from commenting on policy issues like that?
I think there are boundaries that have to be respected by both the parliamentarians, the politicians and the courts. Some policy comment is appropriate, but ultimately when it comes down to the identification of what behaviour should be illegal and what behaviour should be legal, that is a matter for the Parliament, not for the courts.
So how do you yourself, in your very senior position, determine what those boundaries should be, what issues are right to speak out on and which ones aren't?
It's a question of judgment to be made in every case. If you think that by reason of your experience in administering the law you can make a positive contribution to debate, and that the issue is not overtly political, then it's appropriate to comment. But if those tests aren't met, then I think it's inappropriate for judges to speak publicly.
OK, well, let me ask you about a couple of other issues and hopefully they will come within your boundaries.
Yes.
One issue that we've been hearing about for years and years is the overrepresentation of Aborigines in prisons.
Yes.
Is there anything that you have been able to do in Western Australia in your position to address that?
Well, look, unfortunately, the only thing I've been able to do about the overrepresentation of Aboriginal people is draw public attention to it. The statistics suggest that we are not actually making a great deal of progress in reducing that overrepresentation, and that's probably because of the complexity of the problem or the problems that underpin that very important issue.
So is there any, I guess, advice that you would offer from where you sit at the front line, seeing people come through the system, any advice that you would offer governments or politicians about how to actually tackle this at the start, I suppose, of where the problem lies?
Yeah, look, I think it does have to be tackled at the start, and that means that solutions are long-term solutions. There's no quick fixes in relation to the overrepresentation of Aboriginal people. But if I were giving advice to government, I'd say that we should do a lot more listening to Aboriginal people and a lot less talking. We should listen to the very reasonable and responsible Aboriginal elders that we have in our communities around Australia. We should empower them to take responsibility for solving the issues that are so gravely affecting their communities, rather than attempt to prescribe to them what ought to be done.
Some Conservative commentators rail against what they perceive as so-called activist judges. Do you think that Australia does have any sort of problem with that?
No, I don't think whatever activist judges means, I don't think we do have a problem with it. In terms of other courts in other countries, our judges are really quite conservative and stay well inside the appropriate province of the courts, which is finding the facts and applying the law as set by the Parliament to the facts as found. We don't have adventurous courts who move out into areas of policy development and policy making.
I've read you described as a reformist judge. Is that a label that you accept or mind?
Look, I like the label of reformist judge. It's for others to judge whether it's accurate. But I do think we need the law to move in line with contemporary Australian attitudes. If that means that we need to reform the law so that it's relevant and works, then so be it. And I think that's to be encouraged. I spent a lot of time in law reform through the Law Reform Commission over here, which I chaired, and that was a very enjoyable time because I like that aspect of the law.
Chief Justice Wayne Martin, thank you very much and congratulations again.
Thank you very much.